All right, hey, good morning. What's up? My name's Drew. I'm with Buckskin Acres. I have the great pleasure of having John Davis here today. John
Good to
is
see
running
you.
for commissioner of Onslow County. And what I tell people, and for those of you who don't know, I'm a firearms instructor. I'm a concealed carry instructor. And in our classes, we're really big on the Constitution. And more important for me than national elections right now is local elections. Local elections matter. And if you're like me and my wife, we're regular people. We don't have time to go to commissioners' meetings. We don't have time to go to Board of Education meetings. We don't know the ins and outs and the inside baseball of what's going on. But I can't emphasize enough how important these positions are and knowing who you should vote for, right? So I've reached out to some people for some interviews, and John has been nice enough to come and talk with us for a few minutes. And so first, Mr. Davis, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and who you are and where you're from and all that.
Sure. Well,
Yeah.
feel free to call me John.
John, all right.
And,
John. Yeah.
and so mayor of Swansboro, and been mayor for 6 years.
Yeah.
And so my wife and I own the Dairy Queen in Swansboro. This is our 20th year.
Right
as
on.
of February 9th.
Wow.
Yeah, so that's I raised our kids in Onslow County schools and did some homeschooling, did some school, and also put them into school towards their high school years, and one of them in their middle school years. So
Wow, no
two of them in their middle school years. So we did a little bit of mixing up, and that's kind of we've been looking at the Onslow County Commissioner thing, and Mayor George Jones asked me to run, and I retired mayor, of course, and I said, okay, let's do it. Let's look at it.
Right on. Awesome. So tell us a little bit about your political philosophy and maybe why you decided to run for the commissioner spot.
Yeah, so this is a conundrum, right? Because I don't believe in big government, but yet if you're going to change government, you got to run and be a part of the government.
Sure.
So that's the main reason I'm running is taxes, and how can we work to get our taxes down? Because if you look at our tax rate and look at the assessments that we just went through, on average, 27% that we've seen an increase in our taxes. Depending on who you ask, I hear numbers all over. I stick with that 27%, but then we turn around and look at the county did a 5 cents on the 100, I believe it is, but then they decreased that yet the 27%, but they spent increased spending by 30%. So that's the kind of things that I want to work towards. I think we have lived off the increased sales revenue. We've lived off the increased property taxes, and we just keep growing versus how can we stabilize our government? How can we get money back into people's hands? Because I believe the money in your wallet, you know better how to spend than I do.
Absolutely.
So, federally speaking, for your audience, I am definitely a First Amendment and Second Amendment advocate. I don't believe in, let me say it differently. We need in my opinion, we need very minimum regulations on our guns. We need to leave our churches alone. I was very proactive in helping our churches get open in Swansboro, as well as getting our businesses open and everything during COVID and those type of things. So I did not like the overreach that the government took during COVID. So I'll just put that out there.
Yeah, we remember those days quite well. Having to be told you got to leave a certain establishment for not wearing a mask and all that. Man alive, that was tough. Why don't you pause it real quick? All right, yeah, so sorry about that. I'm a good breeder. I got 4 kids, so they keep coming in and out. We got to pause real quick. My 4-year-old running in here distracting me. But, we were talking, Mr. John Davis, about who he is and why he's running. And kind of getting on to the commissioners and the issues that are important to Onslow County residents. You mentioned taxes.
Yeah.
What other issues do you think need to be addressed at the position of the Board of Commissioners? What else do you think is really important?
Well, and let me back up. You said something earlier, and it might have been in our pre-discussion. What does a county commissioner do?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, please explain that.
Yeah, and so number one thing that a county commissioner does is they're a policy maker for the county. They're going to define how we spend your money. That's probably the most important thing they do is the budget.
Budgeting.
Yeah. And then zoning. So like if you have a neighborhood coming in beside you and they want to rezone that land, that decision eventually is going to end up to that board depending on the land use plan, those type of things. So that's your primary job, policymaker and budgetary. So then what I like to say and what a lot of people don't think about is influence. You have a job to influence things on behalf of the county. For example, roads. We don't own any roads as a county. That's either owned by your municipalities or it's owned by North Carolina DOT. So how do we affect that? So we need to work on those partnerships and alliances with North Carolina DOT and with our municipalities. How can we help on our roads and our infrastructure? One of the things that I think we really need in this county is an infrastructure, utility, and services plan that reaches across county line to county line. So that we have a 10, 20, 50-year plan in place that the future boards and paid staff can look at and say, this area of the county is supposed to be, this is what we had agreed to do. You may need to augment it, change it, that's what a plan is, but at least you've given some direction and you can work with DOT and others for roads and infrastructures. For example, I was out at Sneed's Ferry. They've known MARSOC was coming for 20 years, but there's no true planning in place to support all the people that have come to Sneed's Ferry.
Right.
And in their words, we've got roads that were meant for a horse and buggy, and now we got 18-wheelers coming down.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, and I spoke to Lisa Carpenter. I love Lisa because we feel like she's an advocate, and we're hoping you are as well, getting into that position, an advocate for common people, and we can feel comfortable. Hey, look, we got somebody in there that we don't need to worry about that's going to speak for us. That's going to make good decisions. And yeah, we were talking about like some of the big issues that she's had to deal with being the commissioner, and the number one thing that I've heard that people bring up constantly, comes across Democrats, Republicans, doesn't matter, is the conservation of the rural character of the county. And this is a controversial issue because we understand people are coming here, people want to move here, but when we got something that was a beautiful forest or a piece of agricultural land that now is going to be rezoned for high density housing, you just get a sick feeling in your stomach. And I understand, people want to move here, but man alive, we've seen that be an issue. Like, hey, what can we do to conserve more of the agricultural and rural character of these lands we got here in Onslow County? What are your thoughts on that?
So that is why your land use plan is so critical.
Yeah.
And that you get public input to your land use plan. That's also where your public involvement in your rezoning meetings is important.
Right.
Because if you don't define it in your land use plan as cultural, because then, the old saying, it takes an act of Congress. So to change the land use plan forces whatever board is in at that window in time in history to make a hard decision on whether to rezone that or not. And so as people sell their land, and you can always upzone. And upzone is where usually your problem is, right? You go from agricultural to R10 to R20. That you can do that as and not affect legally anybody. But it's hard to, once you get to R20, you can't go backwards without.
What is R20? What is that?
So residential 20, and I don't remember if it's, I don't remember the exact what that 20 means, but it I think you're getting into more high density as that number goes up.
Sure.
And so you went from R10, which is a little bit lower density, to R20, which is a little bit higher density. You can't go backwards without the permission of the landowner. So that's why it's important that that areas that are agricultural and that the people feel, hey, we want to keep this a greenway. That gets documented, gets cemented into a document somewhere, and it makes it more difficult to change it. And so that's where it's critical in these long-term plans that your population centers are involved, like Sneed's Ferry and Hubert.
Yeah.
And then your towns, your municipalities need to be involved in that. And that's the way you create these buffers of land and green space, because if you don't do that now, it's too late. Once somebody has sold their property, right? Because I do believe in personal property rights.
Sure, of course, yeah.
Yeah, so I don't blame somebody for selling a piece of property when somebody's coming in and offering them a very, very nice price for their property, and
Yeah.
they decide to develop it.
Right.
So the only way you get ahead of that is by that planning and by that zoning.
Right, absolutely. Yeah, and like that's one thing that me and Will Arganbright really got along with, is that my political philosophy is freedom, period. I believe in freedom. Is a policy going to give you more freedom or less freedom? And private property rights comes into that. And something me and Will talked about is like, hey, every amendment in the Constitution, we have to support it, and private property rights is important. But one thing that I see is that on a small scale level, if you've got neighborhoods, and if I'm in a housing development and I want to put up some kind of obstructive, building, and it bothers my neighbors, the county can come in and say, you can't do that, right? Because it bothers your neighbors. But when we talk about large amounts of land where you're going to develop and you're going to put 100 houses that bothers everybody, that causes traffic, that does all this, then all of a sudden for the multi-million-dollar developer, we have that exception. That hey, that's okay. It may bother everybody, but here at a small level. And I know that's a simplistic way of looking at it, but that's something that I've seen that people bring up and they say, hey, look, this is crazy.
And it affects your roads, it affects your schools, and that's why you got to get these stakeholders at the table, because those are things you need to think through. And again, you can't just think about it for tomorrow or next year or in 2-3 years. You got to be thinking down the road, because this county's going to keep growing, and eventually you're going to see Swansboro and Jacksonville on the right side of the road. You're not going to be able to tell where it starts and stops. You're going to have the same problem heading to Richlands, and similar problems in your other areas of the county.
Absolutely, yeah. And that's something that Lisa brought up, is that rezoning meetings is where the most amount of residents all of a sudden show up to a board of commissioners meeting, because they get emotional about it. They come in and people get real upset, and it's something that is an issue, and I'm glad you addressed that. Is there anything else that you'd like to mention that is important to you?
Well, I see a Marine flag on the wall.
Yes, sir.
And I definitely want to speak to our veterans that are watching. You can look at my record as the mayor of Swansboro. About six months in, almost to the day, I started getting emails and phone calls about, hey, I want you to come to Morehead City, or I want you to come to Jacksonville to be part of Memorial Day service. And at the end of that weekend, I'm like, why am I driving to Jacksonville? Why am I doing that? And what that really did is, although I wanted to fix that microcosm problem, it really got me thinking into a macro, for our veterans. And how are we supporting our veterans? How are we doing that better? And so from a Swansboro perspective, which I would continue that belief system into Onslow County, we've got to do better at taking care of our veterans. I'll start with the what I would say is the more fun stuff, or the it's important, but it has maybe a lighter view to it. Is we've got to support our Carolina Museum of Marines. For whatever reason, the county took their foot off the gas pedal on that. Well, they're getting ready to break ground this year, and instead of helping them to get there to break ground, we took our foot off the gas pedal. And that's tourism dollars. That's not even tax dollars coming out of our pockets. That's folks that are coming into the county, staying at the hotel. That's easy money for me. Hey, let's get that museum up. We did a similar thing. We've got the Veterans Garden, working with Jeff Bailey with Southern Glass.
Yeah.
And he donated 3 acres. And George Cleveland, who got us $200,000 to donate to that. So that's coming along over in Swansboro. So those are things that we want to see accomplished, and what we want to build off of that is a veterans trail. So when mom and dad's got their young Marine over there, and their commander said, hey, I need you at base for today, they can go to Morehead City, they can go to Goldsboro, they can go to the USS North Carolina in Wilmington, and the center hub is the Carolina Museum of the Marines. And then, of course, adding Swansboro in, if Holly Ridge or Richlands, they do something, you just add that into the trail. Now, to take this into what I would call a more critical level, and that was the trying to create that delineation, is we've got are these problems with our VA.
Right.
We've got a VA clinic in Jacksonville with no doctors. How is it that we have a clinic with no doctors? And I've really just learned about that in the last 2 months, that we have folks that are having a hard time getting prescriptions, and they want to see a real doctor, not just somebody on a computer screen.
Yeah.
And we've got a VA hospital in the plans that the money has already been approved at the federal level, $62 million. So how is the county, and as commissioners, are we engaging with our congressmen and our senators to get that here and start thinking about where is it going to be, how are we going to staff it, so how do we make it not just a pretty building, but a place that is functional and really takes care of our veterans, so that they're not having to go to Fayetteville, Durham, Wilmington, or worse yet, they're being told, oh, just wait, sorry, you can't go to that appointment you had because we don't approve that doctor. And I'm hearing that and the prescriptions things quite frequently.
Wow, how about that? Yeah, that's stuff that we haven't really thought about at all. So it's really good. Yeah, and as we close out here, one other segment that I'd ask you to keep in mind is that there's a large portion of this county that is really into small-time agriculture. And there's a Facebook group out there called Barnyards by the Sea, and these are folks that like they may live in a neighborhood, but in their backyard with their privacy fence, they've got their own eggs production, they're growing meat rabbits, they're growing food, they're trying to stay self-sufficient on a small scale. And I think that's really important, and one thing about private property rights is that you come into a neighborhood like ours, we're kind of out in the country a little bit, everybody here has freedom. My neighbor, he may have a bunch of junk cars, my other neighbor runs a trash business, I have a shooting range, and we're able to have this kind of private property freedom, and we all kind of get along doing these things. And when we have these big high density neighborhoods, people don't have that kind of freedom. Right. But how do you feel about these folks that want to be able to grow their own food, and maybe sometimes where they're living they're not supposed to have livestock or something like that? What's your thoughts on that kind of thing?
So homesteading, I think it's the word
for
it.
Yeah, homesteading.
And I think homesteading's a great thing.
Yeah.
That's if my wife would allow me, I'd own a farm, but it's not her thing, so we don't own one.
Sure.
And as you know, I got a farm
Yeah.
I'd love to be plowing
That's
some ground.
Right. We got along right away. He's a farm guy like me. So.
But again, coming back to personal property rights, if you haven't put yourself in a bad zone, I think there's some decision making there, right? When you buy your property, and if that's something you want to do,
sure,
you really need to understand the zoning that you're buying in.
Right.
You also need to understand, are you buying in a HOA?
HOA.
Because as you know, there's a bill in North Carolina to reduce the rights of HOAs, because they're stronger, believe this, they are stronger than a municipality in court. That's how much power an HOA has.
I don't understand that. I find that to be a tyranny.
Yeah.
Like, we don't have that, thank God, but they have some tyrannical freaking power over people and what they can do with private property. You know what I'm saying?
So it's big to really think through if you want a homestead, where you buy.
Absolutely.
Now, if you buy within the zoning that permits that, I am 100% for it, and I think it's a great thing, because for those of us that don't homestead, let's go back to COVID. All right, the shock that COVID hit for me and my family was, wow, never thought we would get here, where everybody's rushing the grocery store.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not a prepper, as they say, but I admire the people that are doing things that keeps them prepared if something were to happen, because I think COVID was a wake-up call that, wow, you really can lose this food chain that we're spoiled. Sure. We can go to the grocery store and buy bread, milk, eggs, everything we want.
Yes.
Right now. When COVID hit, we learned, okay, that's a very breakable thing. And so to my homesteaders, I think you're being very smart, and I think you're keeping ahead of the curve when something like COVID happens, because you're not racing to the grocery store, you're not panicking, and I'll support you.
Absolutely. That's good to hear. Okay. Well, do you have anything else you'd like to say before we close out?
Well, certainly for those listening, I would ask for your vote. John Davis on, early voting ends tomorrow, I believe. I don't think it ends today. I'm pretty sure it ends tomorrow.
Okay.
And then Tuesday is the day. I believe it's Super Tuesday, actually.
Tuesday, March
5th.
March 5th. All right.
So I would ask for your vote, and I will work. My dad instilled to me this work ethic that I can't seem to get rid of. So I'll work just as hard as commissioner as I do as a candidate. And I love sitting down with people and talking and listening, and that's just who I am, and it's what I've done when I'm in Swansboro, and have no intention to change.
Absolutely, thank you. And that's what I want to say too. Is I think it's really important to mix it up and get new people in. Get a fresh perspective. I don't know if I'm going to support any incumbent right now. I don't know. I'm more inclined to get folks like John Davis into office who are going to be, hey, look, fresh perspective, representing the people, kind of like Lisa is right now. And I hope you guys get out there and vote. Get out there on March 5th and cast your ballot. Board of Education. I'll try and get some folks here as well. And then I know there's larger state elections going on too, for lieutenant governor and governor and primaries and stuff like that. So anyway, thanks for watching. Leave us a comment. Tell us what you think. And we'll see you soon. Thanks.